single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story. The rhythmic tapping of chalk against the blackboard echoed through room 237 as Pete Wiggins sketched out the molecular structure of benzene. His practiced hand moved with precision, each line connecting to form the distinctive hexagonal shape, while 28 sophomores scribbled in their notebooks. "Remember," Pete said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "what makes benzene unique is its resonance structure. These double bonds aren't fixed. They're constantly shifting, sharing electrons." He turned to face his class, chalk dust coating his fingertips. Kind of like a molecular dance. A few students chuckled at his attempt at making organic chemistry relatable. In the third row, Marcus Chin raised his hand. "Mr. Wiggins, will this be on the AP exam?" "Everything's fair game for the AP, Marcus." Pete glanced at the clock. 2:45 p.m. "But don't worry, we'll have plenty of practice sessions before May." Speaking of which, who's joining us this Saturday for the study group? Several hands shot up. Pete smiled, noting the familiar faces of his most dedicated students. The bell rang, triggering the usual scramble of notebooks being shoved into backpacks and chairs scraping against linoleum. "Don't forget to read Chapter 7, he called out as students filed past his desk. "And Jessica, great job on yesterday's lab report." The last student disappeared through the doorway, leaving Pete alone with a lingering scent of dry erase markers and teenage anxiety. He began wiping down the blackboard, his movements mechanical after 15 years of the same routine. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching dust motes in golden beams that illuminated the periodic table poster he'd hung up his first day teaching at Riverside High. A soft knock on the doorframe made him turn. Carol stood there, her English department lanyard swaying slightly as she leaned against the door. Even after 20 years of marriage, the sight of her still made his heart skip a beat. The way her dark hair caught the light, how her reading glasses perched on top of her head like a crown. "Ready to head home, chemistry man?" she asked, her lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Pete didn't notice the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed restlessly against her thigh. "Almost done here." He gathered a stack of ungraded papers. "How was your day?" "The usual. Trying to convince freshmen that Shakespeare isn't torture." She stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the floor. "Oh, Rick called earlier. He's having a rough time with the divorce proceedings." Pete's hands stilled on the papers. His cousin Rick's divorce had been the main topic of family conversation for the past 3 months. "How's he holding up?" "He needs somewhere to stay for a while." His lawyer advised him to move out of the house during the negotiations. Carol's voice was carefully neutral. "I told him he could stay with us." Pete looked up, meeting his wife's gaze. "Of course he can stay. He's family." He missed a flash of something? Guilt? Relief? That crossed Carol's face. "The guest room needs some cleaning up." "But I already told him yes," Carol interrupted. "He'll be here tomorrow." Pete nodded, sliding the papers into his worn leather briefcase. "We should pick up some groceries then. Rick always liked your lasagna." The drive home was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of their Honda's aging engine and the local NPR station discussing climate change. Their house sat on Maple Street, a modest 3-bedroom colonial with fading blue shutters and a slightly overgrown lawn. Pete had been meaning to mow it all week, but after-school tutoring had eaten up his afternoons. Their daughter Jamie's bike lay on its side in the driveway. Pete picked it up as they walked past, wheeling it into the garage where it belonged. "Jamie needs to remember to put this away properly," he muttered. "She's 16, Pete. She has other things on her mind." Carol's tone held an edge he didn't quite understand. Inside, they found Jamie sprawled on the living room couch, textbooks surrounding her like academic satellites. She looked up from her phone as they entered, her dark hair, so like her mother's, falling across her face. "Dad, can you help me with my chem homework?" she asked. "Mr. Rodriguez isn't nearly as good at explaining things as you are." Pete set his briefcase down, already moving toward the couch. "Of course, sweetie. What are you working on?" "Stoichiometry," Jamie groaned. "It's like reading hieroglyphics." "That's because you haven't found the key yet." Pete settled beside her, picking up her textbook. "Once you understand the relationships between the numbers, it all falls into place." Carol watched them for a moment, her expression unreadable. "I'll start dinner," she said, but neither Pete nor Jamie noticed how her hand trembled as she reached for her phone, or how quickly she disappeared into the kitchen. The next afternoon, Rick arrived in his gleaming BMW M5, its metallic paint job catching the sun like liquid silver. Pete helped him carry his bags inside, noting how his cousin's designer clothes seemed out of place in their modest guest room. "I can't thank you enough, Pete," Rick said, clapping him on the shoulder. His cologne was expensive, his smile bright and practiced like the ones he used in his real estate headshots. "You're a lifesaver, man." "Really? Stay as long as you need," Pete replied, meaning it. "That's what family's for, right?" Rick's smile flickered for just a moment. "Right? Family." The first few weeks settled into a routine. Rick left early each morning in his BMW, returning late with stories about property showings and client meetings. He brought expensive bottles of wine to dinner, insisted on ordering takeout from upscale restaurants instead of letting Pete or Carol cook. His presence filled the house with an energy that Pete couldn't quite define. Part chaos, part charm, all momentum. But there were moments, small ones at first, that should have registered as warning signs. The way Rick's hand lingered on Carol's shoulder during family dinner. How Carol started wearing perfume to school. The whispered phone conversations that stopped when Pete entered a room. One evening, while Pete graded lab reports at the dining room table, Jamie slipped into the chair across from him. Her face held the serious expression she'd inherited from him, the one that meant she was wrestling with something important. "Dad," she started, then stopped, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Can I ask you something?" Pete set down his red pen. "Always. Have you noticed anything? Word lately?" "With Mom." The question hung in the air like smoke. Pete's mind flashed to small changes he'd noticed but hadn't wanted to examine too closely. Carol's new clothes. The late-night department meetings that never appeared on the school calendar. The way she seemed to light up whenever Rick entered a room. "What do you mean weird?" he asked carefully. Jamie's fingers twisted the thread tighter. "Yesterday, I heard her on the phone with Uncle Rick. She was laughing, but not her normal laugh. It was different. Like when Lisa Peterson talks to her boyfriend during lunch. She looked up at her father, her eyes troubled. And they're always whispering together. When they think no one's watching." Pete's chest tightened, but he forced a reassuring smile. "Your mom's just helping Uncle Rick through a tough time. You know how difficult divorce can be." "Dad," Jamie started, but the sound of the front door opening cut her off. Carol's voice drifted in from the hallway, followed by Rick's deeper tones. "We're home," Carol called out. "Rick took me to that new Thai place downtown. We brought leftovers." Pete watched as his wife breezed into the dining room, her cheeks flushed, hair slightly windblown. Rick followed, carrying takeout bags that probably cost more than Pete spent on groceries in a week. "You should have called," Pete said mildly. "I made chicken for dinner." "Oh." Carol's smile faltered slightly. "I thought you'd be busy with grading." Rick had a successful closing today, so he wanted to celebrate. "Big commission," Rick added, flashing his perfect teeth. "Thought I'd treat my favorite cousin's wife to a thank you dinner for putting up with me these past weeks." Jamie stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not hungry," she announced and fled upstairs. The sound of her door slamming echoed through the house. "Teenagers," Rick chuckled, but his eyes followed Carol as she moved around the kitchen, putting away the untouched chicken Pete had made. The weeks bled into months. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, but inside the Wiggins household, something was wilting. Pete threw himself into his teaching, spending extra hours after school helping students prepare for their AP exams. If he noticed how Carol's department meetings coincided with Rick's late showings, he pushed the observation deep down where it couldn't touch him. But reality had a way of demanding attention. It was a Tuesday evening in late April when everything shattered. Pete had stayed late at school, working with a struggling student who needed extra help before finals. The rain had started during their session, and by the time he pulled into his driveway, it was coming down in sheets. He found Carol in their bedroom, methodically placing folded clothes into a suitcase. The sight stopped him in the doorway, water dripping from his coat onto the carpet. "What's going on?" The words felt like glass in his throat. Carol didn't look up from her packing. "I think you know Pete." "Actually, I don't." But he did. God help him, he did. She straightened then, turning to face him. Her expression wasn't what he expected. No tears, no guilt, just a cold determination that made her look like a stranger wearing his wife's face. Here's how it's going to be, she said, each word precise and practiced. Rick needs me during his divorce. I'm moving into his beach house in Ocean City. She zipped the suitcase with a decisive motion. We've been having an affair for months. The family knows. The room spun slightly. Pete gripped the door frame to steady himself. The family knows? Of course they do. Carol's laugh was brittle. Your sister Leah's been covering for us. Your mother thinks it's romantic. How Rick and I found real love. Even Jamie understands that sometimes parents need to follow their hearts. Jamie? His daughter's name came out as a whisper. Jamie knows? She caught us last month in Rick's car. Carol picked up her suitcase, the expensive one Rick had bought her for Christmas. She's been very mature about it. Unlike how you're going to be. Pete's mind raced through memories, recoloring them with this new knowledge. The family dinners where Rick dominated the conversation. The way his mother had started making comments about how teaching wasn't a real career. Jamie's increasing withdrawal, her troubled looks, her attempts to warn him. How long? He managed to ask. Does it matter? Carol moved past him, her shoulder brushing his as if they were strangers passing on the street. Rick makes me feel alive. Pete, when was the last time you did that? When was the last time you did anything except grade papers and tutor other people's children? She was halfway down the stairs when Pete found his voice again. We have 20 years together, Carol. A family. A life. She paused, one hand on the banister. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Regret, perhaps, or memory. Then it was gone, replaced by that same cold resolve. She corrected. We had 20 years. Now I'm having something else. The front door opened and closed. Through the window, Pete watched his wife walk through the rain to where Rick's BMW idled at the curb, its headlights cutting through the darkness like accusing eyes. He stood there long after they'd driven away, the sound of rain mixing with the thundering of his pulse in his ears. A soft sound behind him made him turn. Jamie stood in her doorway, tears streaming down her face. I tried to tell you, Dad, she whispered. I tried. Pete opened his arms, and his daughter fell into them, both of them sinking to the floor as their world crumbled around them. Through the window, lightning illuminated the empty driveway where Carol's car still sat, a testament to the life she'd chosen to leave behind. In the guest room, Rick's expensive cologne still lingered in the air, a poisonous reminder of how trust, like certain chemical compounds, could break down under the right conditions, leaving nothing but toxic residue in its wake. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to the human drama it witnessed. Inside room 237 at Riverside High, Pete's carefully drawn benzene molecule remained on the blackboard, its electrons forever dancing their deceptive dance, while down the hall, Carol's empty classroom held only silence and shadows, waiting for the next day's beginning. A beginning that would arrive whether its inhabitants were ready or not. The whispers started before first period. Pete heard them as he walked through Riverside High's main hallway, snippets of conversation that died when he passed by. Students huddled in clusters, their eyes following his progress toward room 237. Some looked away when he met their gaze. Others stared with naked curiosity. At his desk, 3 parent emails waited in his inbox. All requested classroom transfers for their children. The most recent one, from Margaret Chun, Marcus's mother, stood out. Asterisk, Dear Mr. Wiggins. Given the current circumstances, we feel it would be best for Marcus to complete his chemistry credits with Mr. Rodriguez instead. While we appreciate your dedication as a teacher, we believe this change will be less disruptive to his academic focus. Regards, Margaret Chun asterisk. Pete's fingers hovered over the keyboard, composing and deleting responses in his mind. What could he say? That his wife's affair with his cousin shouldn't affect their children's education? That he was still the same teacher who'd helped Marcus ace his midterm? A knock on his classroom door interrupted his thoughts. Leah stood in the doorway, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. His sister's presence at the school was unexpected. She usually avoided anything education-related, preferring the glamour of the family's real estate business. "We need to talk, Pete," she said, stepping inside and closing the door. "About how you helped them?" The words came out sharper than he'd intended. "Or about how everyone knew except me?" Leah's perfectly manicured fingers twisted the strap of her bag. "You don't understand. Rick and Carol, what they have is special. Real love doesn't come along every day. Real love." Pete's laugh was hollow. "Is that what you call betraying your brother?" "Don't be dramatic." Leah perched on a student desk, her expensive suit out of place among the scientific posters and periodic tables. "Mom agrees with me. If you joined the family business instead of hiding in this classroom, maybe Carol wouldn't have felt so unfulfilled." The bell rang, saving Pete from responding. Students began filtering in, their chatter dying as they noticed Leah. "We're not done discussing this," she said, standing to leave. "Mom wants you to come to Sunday dinner. To talk things through like adults." Pete watched her go, her heels clicking against the linoleum. Behind him, someone whispered, "That's his sister, the one who helped Mrs. Wiggins and Mr. Nunez." The day crawled by in a haze of chemical equations and avoided gazes. Pete threw himself into his lectures, explaining ionic bonds and valence electrons with mechanical precision. If he focused hard enough on electron configurations, he could almost forget how his family had reconfigured themselves around Rick and Carol's affair. After his last class, Jamie appeared in his doorway. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her shoulders hunched under the weight of secrets too heavy for a 16-year-old. "Can we go home?" she asked quietly. "I don't want to wait for Mom to pick me up anymore." In the car, Jamie stared out the window, her fingers tracing patterns on the foggy glass. "They kissed in front of me, Dad," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In Rick's car, after my choir practice last month. He said," she swallowed hard, "he said I should be happy for them. That Mom deserved someone who could give her everything she wanted." Pete's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Jamie, I'm so sorry you were put in that position. Mom said I'd understand when I'm older and in love." Jamie's laugh sounded too old, too bitter. She said, "Real love is worth any price. But all I understand is that they hurt you." "They hurt us?" At home, the emptiness of Carol's closet screamed louder than any argument. Pete found himself standing in their bedroom, his bedroom now, staring at the vacant spaces where her life had been. The indent in her pillow was still visible, like a fossil of their marriage preserved in fabric. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Asterisk, you're being childish, Peter. Come to dinner on Sunday. Rick and Carol will be there. We need to discuss this like family, asterisk." Before he could respond, another message appeared. "Asterisk, you chose teaching over the family business. Don't choose pride over family too, asterisk." The messages kept coming throughout the week. From Leah. "Asterisk, Mom's right. You're being emotionally unavailable, just like always, asterisk." From his Aunt Maria. "Asterisk, Rick says you're not handling this well. Think of Jamie. She needs stability, asterisk." From cousins, uncles, family friends. Each message a fresh betrayal. Each word poisoned with Rick's version of events. Pete's phone became a repository of pain, buzzing with constant reminders of how thoroughly Rick had turned his family against him. At school, the situation deteriorated. Parents whispered during PTA meetings. Teachers split into factions, some supporting Carol, others awkwardly avoiding Pete altogether. Even his AP chemistry students seemed distracted, their eyes occasionally darting to their phones during lectures. "They're reading posts about us," Jamie explained during lunch in his classroom. She'd stopped eating in the cafeteria, avoiding the stares and whispers. "Rick's been telling everyone you're unstable. That Mom had to leave because you were too focused on teaching to be a real husband." The choir concert was the breaking point. Pete sat alone in the auditorium while Jamie's group performed Bridge over Troubled Water, an irony that wasn't lost on him. Halfway through the song, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Rick and Carol had arrived together, his arm around her waist. Pete's family, his mother, Leah, cousins he'd grown up with clustered around them like a protective shield. Jamie's voice faltered when she saw them. Her eyes found Pete's in the audience, a silent apology in their depths. After the performance, Pete waited by the stage door, but Carol got there first. Beautiful job, sweetheart, she said, reaching for Jamie. Rick and I thought we could take you for ice cream to celebrate. Jamie stepped back. I'm going home with Dad. Jamie. Rick appeared behind Carol, his smile professionally concerned. Your mother, and I think it might be good for you to spend more time with us. Get used to the new arrangement. The new arrangement? Pete's voice carried in the emptying auditorium. Is that what we're calling this? Rick's smile never wavered. Pete, you're making a scene. Think about Jamie. I am thinking about Jamie. Pete stepped forward, placing himself between his daughter and the couple. I'm thinking about how you made her keep your secret. How you kissed her mother in front of her and expected her to be happy about it. This is exactly why we're concerned, Carol said, loud enough for nearby parents to hear. Your emotional instability isn't good for Jamie's development. The drive home was silent. Jamie disappeared upstairs immediately, leaving Pete alone with the weight of the evening. He was reviewing student papers when he heard it, soft sobbing from Jamie's room. Following the sound, he found his daughter curled on her bed, phone clutched in her hand. They want to take me away from you, she choked out between sobs. I heard them talking after the concert. Mom says you're not good for my development anymore. They're going to file for custody. Something inside Pete, something that had been bending for weeks, finally snapped. He went to his study and pulled out his old address book, flipping through yellowed pages until he found the number he needed. Barry Hahn picked up on the third ring. Pete, is that really you? Barry. Pete's voice was steady, calmer than he'd felt in weeks. I need your help. I need to protect my daughter. Whatever it takes, his old college roommate replied without hesitation. Tell me everything. In his room, Jamie had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her phone still displaying the group chat where her friends discussed her parents' drama. Pete gently removed it from her grip, pulling her blanket up to her shoulders. I won't let them take you, he whispered. I promise. The next morning, driving to school, Pete noticed a new billboard on Main Street. Rick's smiling face above the words, "Trust the Nunez name in real estate." The smile that had once seemed charming now looked predatory, a wolf's grin in sheep's clothing. The school day brought fresh humiliations. 3 more parents requested transfers. Whispers followed him through the halls where he'd taught for 15 years. In the teacher's lounge, conversations stopped when he entered. But then something unexpected happened. Deborah Long, the school's guidance counselor, cornered him after his last class. Her usually cheerful face was serious as she closed his classroom door. I've been keeping records, she said without preamble, of Carol's behavior at school. The inappropriate phone calls during class time. The extended lunches with Rick in the parking lot. The way she's been using school resources to coordinate their meetings. Pete stared at her. Why? Because what they're doing isn't right. Deborah pulled out a manila folder. And because your students care about you, Pete. Look, inside were letters, dozens of them, from current and former students, all expressing support for Mr. Wiggins. Marcus Chin stood out. Asterisk, Mr. Wiggins made me love chemistry. He stays late to help us understand difficult concepts. He remembers our birthdays and our favorite elements. My mom wants me to switch classes, but I won't. Some people might believe the rumors, but we know who our real teacher is. Asterisk. As Pete read, another unexpected ally emerged. His phone buzzed with an unknown number. Asterisk, this is Sylvia Sawyer, Rick's ex-wife. We need to talk. There are things you should know about your cousin's business practices. Asterisk. The message blinked on his screen like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Pete thought of Jamie sleeping fitfully upstairs, of his turned family, of the life he'd built being dismantled piece by piece. Whatever it takes, he muttered, saving Sylvia's number. That evening, as Pete graded papers in his empty house, his mother's words echoed in his head. You chose teaching over the family business. She was right. He had chosen teaching. And now he would choose Jamie. Choose truth. Choose justice over the toxic version of family loyalty Rick had cultivated. The Bunsen burners in room 237 sat cold and silent, waiting for tomorrow's experiments. Outside, Rick's billboard caught the setting sun, his frozen smile a challenge in the gathering dusk. But for the first time since Carol packed her suitcase, Pete felt something other than despair. He had allies. He had evidence. Most importantly, he had Jamie, strong, resilient Jamie, who chose truth over comfort, who saw through the pretty lies Rick and Carol had spun. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his mother. Asterisk Rick says you're forcing Jamie to take sides. Stop being selfish, Peter. Think about what's best for her, asterisk. Pete looked at Jamie's latest chemistry test, still waiting to be graded. She'd drawn a small heart next to her name, just like she'd done since elementary school. Some bonds, he realized, couldn't be broken by pretty words or beach houses or family pressure. Some bonds, like the ones he taught about in class, only grew stronger under pressure. Barry Hahn's office smelled of coffee and old paper. Strips of afternoon sunlight cut through Venetian blinds, illuminating dust motes that danced above stacks of files and surveillance photos. Pete sat across from his old college roommate, watching as Barry laid out document after document on his cluttered desk. Your cousin's been busy, Barry said, tapping a thick manila folder. Sylvia Sawyer's information checked out. I've documented at least 12 properties Rick sold in the last year with concealed structural damage. Here's the kicker. He used the same inspector for all of them, a guy named Mike DeLuca, who's facing his own investigation for falsified reports. Pete leafed through property assessments, inspection reports, and photographs showing cracked foundations carefully hidden beneath fresh paint and stage furniture. And Carol's involvement? She's been helping him with the paperwork. Barry pulled out a series of emails. Using her school email account, no less. She's been corresponding with buyers, processing documents during school hours. There's even evidence she helped backdate some inspection certificates. The revelation twisted in Pete's stomach. Even now, after everything, discovering new depths to their betrayal hurt. What about Jamie? Pete's voice caught. The custody threat? Barry's expression softened. They don't have a case, Pete. Between Deborah Long's documentation of Carol's behavior at school and these fraudulent business dealings, no judge would rule in their favor. But, he hesitated. But what? They're going to try anyway. My sources say they're filing next week. They're going to paint you as unstable, claim your obsession with teaching is detrimental to Jamie's well-being. Pete stared at the evidence spread before him. Paper trails of lies and betrayal. Each document a brick in the wall Rick and Carol had built between him and his family. What's our next move? We wait. Barry gathered the documents carefully. Let them file. Let them walk into court thinking they hold all the cards. Then we show our hand. The next week crawled by like a wounded animal. Pete taught his classes, helped students with college applications, and tried to ignore the whispers that still followed him through the halls. Jamie spent more time in his classroom, doing homework while he graded papers, both of them finding comfort in their shared routine. The custody papers arrived on a Wednesday, delivered to him between 4th and 5th period by a court officer who looked uncomfortable serving documents in a high school. Pete read them during his lunch break, each accusation more outrageous than the last. Petitioners assert that respondents' excessive focus on his teaching career has created an emotionally neglectful home environment. Respondent has demonstrated increasing instability since the separation, including making unfounded accusations against petitioner Carol Carson-Wiggins and her partner Richard Nunez. The minor child would benefit from the stable, nurturing environment provided by petitioners. That evening, Pete and Jamie sat at their kitchen table, picking at a pizza neither of them really wanted to eat. They can't take me away, right? Jamie's voice sounded younger than her 16 years. The judge will see through their lies? Pete reached across the table, squeezing her hand. They won't take you anywhere. I promise. The court date arrived with autumn's first real chill. Pete straightened his tie in the courthouse bathroom mirror, Barry's words echoing in his head. Let them make their case first. Let them dig their own grave. The courtroom felt smaller than he'd expected. Rick and Carol sat at one table, both wearing expensive suits that seemed to advertise the lifestyle they thought Jamie deserved. Pete's family filled the seats behind them. His mother, Leah, cousins he'd grown up with, all still believing Rick's carefully crafted narrative. Only Jamie sat behind Pete, along with Deborah Long and several of his students who'd insisted on being there. Marcus Chin gave him a thumbs up as he passed. Rick and Carol's lawyer went first, painting a picture of Pete as an obsessed teacher who'd driven his wife away with his emotional unavailability and modest ambitions. My clients can provide a stable, financially secure environment, the lawyer argued. Mr. Nunez's successful real estate business and Mrs. Carson Wiggins' dedication to education make them ideal guardians. Pete watched Rick nod solemnly at these words, noticed how Carol touched his arm in a practiced display of unity. He thought of all the family dinners where Rick had praised his heart of gold while plotting to steal his life. Then it was Barry's turn. "Your Honor," he began, "before we address custody, there are some matters that demand the court's attention." He approached the bench with a thick folder. "We have evidence of extensive fraud committed by Mr. Nunez in his real estate business, fraud that Mrs. Carson Wiggins has actively participated in." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Rick's confident smile flickered. Barry laid out the evidence methodically. Property photographs, falsified inspection reports, emails sent from Carol's school account during class hours, testimony from buyers who discovered hidden damage after purchase. With each new document, Rick's face grew paler. Furthermore, Barry continued, "We have documentation from Riverside High's guidance counselor regarding Mrs. Carson Wiggins' inappropriate behavior at school, including using school resources to facilitate her affair with Mr. Nunez." Deborah Long stood, holding up her own records. "I've documented numerous instances of Mrs. Carson Wiggins abandoning her classes for extended lunches with Mr. Nunez, using school phones for personal calls, and discussing private matters in front of students." Pete watched his family's faces as the truth unfolded. Leah's perfect makeup couldn't hide her growing horror. His mother's hands trembled as she clutched her purse. Then Jamie took the stand. "They made me keep their secret," she said, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. "They kissed in front of me and said I should be happy about it. Mom said I'd understand when I'm older and in love, but all I understand is that they hurt my dad and expected me to help them do it." Rick stood up suddenly. "This is ridiculous." "These accusations are." "Mr. Nunez," the judge cut in sharply, "you'll have your chance to respond. Though given the evidence being presented, I strongly advise you to consult with your lawyer first." The hearing didn't last much longer. The judge not only dismissed the custody petition, but ordered an immediate investigation into Rick's business practices and Carol's professional conduct. As court officers approached Rick, Pete watched his cousin's carefully constructed world crumble. "You did this," Rick snarled as they led him away. "You couldn't just accept that Carol chose me? That I won?" Pete didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth had spoken loudly enough. In the weeks that followed, Rick's real estate empire collapsed like a house built on sand. The fraud investigation uncovered more properties, more falsified reports, more lives impacted by his deception. Carol's involvement cost her her teaching license, her reputation destroyed by the same school resources she'd used to facilitate their affair. Pete's family began their own painful reckoning. Leah came to his classroom one afternoon, her designer clothes wrinkled, her usual confidence replaced by genuine remorse. "I got caught up in their romance narrative," she confessed, perching on a student desk like she had months ago. But this time, her voice held no judgment, only regret. "I forgot about the real people they were hurting. About you and Jamie. About what family really means." "Why?" Pete asked simply. "Why did everyone choose his side so easily?" "Because he sold us a story we wanted to believe. About passion and grand gestures and living life large." Leah wiped at her eyes, smearing expensive mascara. "We forgot that real love isn't about beach houses and wild nights. It's about showing up every day, teaching kids chemistry, being there when they need you." The deepest cut came from his mother. Pete found her waiting outside his classroom after Rick's arrest, looking older than he'd ever seen her. "I watched them lead him away in handcuffs," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "All these years, I pushed you to join the family business. I thought Rick was everything a son should be. Successful, ambitious, larger than life." She met his eyes, years of regret evident in her gaze. "I chose the wrong son to be proud of." The seasons turned. Fall painted the trees outside room 237 in colors of change and renewal. Pete kept teaching, helping students understand both chemistry and the more complex elements of human nature. Jamie's smile returned gradually, like spring flowers testing the air after a long winter. 1 year later, Pete stayed late after school, preparing the next day's experiment. The familiar scent of chemicals and chalk dust wrapped around him like an old friend. The door opened, and Jamie walked in, accompanied by Abby Whitehead from the math department. "Dad, you're working too hard again," Jamie announced, her 17-year-old face carrying a wisdom beyond her years. "We're staging an intervention. Ms. Whitehead agrees you need ice cream." Abby smiled, her presence as steady and calming as the equation she taught. Over the past year, she'd become a quiet constant in their lives, sharing lunch breaks with Pete, offering mathematical perspectives on his chemistry lessons, understanding his need to heal at his own pace. "Your daughter's right," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Even teachers need to learn new equations sometimes." At the ice cream parlor, sitting in a booth warmed by the setting sun, Jamie reached for Pete's hand. "You know what, Dad? When people at school talk about what happened, they don't gossip anymore. They talk about how you stayed strong, kept teaching, kept caring. You showed me what real love looks like. Not the dramatic kind, but the kind that stays even when it's hard." Pete squeezed her hand, feeling unexpected tears prick his eyes. The fancy beach house and expensive cars had never been his dream anyway. His real treasure sat across from him, resilient and wise beyond her years, while new possibilities sat beside him, tasting strawberry ice cream and talking about tomorrow's lessons. "Sometimes," he replied, looking between them, his daughter who'd chosen truth over comfort, and Abby who understood that healing wasn't a straight line. "The best things in life are the ones you never saw coming." The setting sun painted the sky in colors of healing and hope, as three people who'd learned the true meaning of family shared simple ice cream and complex truths. Sometimes Pete realized winning isn't about revenge at all. It's about finding your way back to joy, one small moment at a time. In room 237, the periodic table still hung where he'd placed it 15 years ago, its elements arranged in perfect, predictable order. But Pete had learned that while chemistry might be about perfect bonds, life was about imperfect ones, about rebuilding, reshaping, and discovering that sometimes the strongest connections are forged in the aftermath of breaking. Epilogue. 5 years later, the real estate section of the Philadelphia Inquirer was spread across Pete's kitchen table, coffee rings staining the edges. A small article in the corner caught his eye. Former Ocean City realtor released after 3-year sentence. Richard Nunez, convicted of multiple counts of real estate fraud in 2025, was released from state prison yesterday. Nunez, once a prominent figure in Ocean City's luxury property market, served 3 years of a 5-year sentence for fraudulent property sales and falsifying inspection documents. His release comes with strict conditions, including prohibition from engaging in real estate transactions and mandatory restitution payments to affected homeowners. Pete folded the paper carefully, remembering the day Rick's empire had finally crumbled. The investigation had uncovered 37 properties sold with concealed damage, affecting over 40 families. The restitution payments had claimed Rick's beach house, his cars, and every asset he'd accumulated through years of fraud. "Dad?" Jamie's voice carried from upstairs. "Have you seen my graduation cords?" "Check the laundry room," Pete called back. Mom probably ironed them. The word mom no longer stuck in his throat when referring to Abby. They'd married 2 years ago, a small ceremony in the chemistry lab where they'd first started sharing lunch breaks. Jamie had been their witness, beaming as she handed them their rings. The front door opened, and Abby walked in, carrying a stack of final exams from her calculus class. She'd been named head of the math department last year, her steady leadership style earning respect from students and colleagues alike. "Marcus Chin stopped by my classroom today," she said, kissing Pete's cheek. "He's finishing his PhD in chemical engineering at MIT. Says you're the reason he chose the field." Pete smiled, remembering the shy sophomore who'd once worried about AP exams. Now Marcus was developing sustainable energy solutions, his research making waves in academic circles. "Jamie's panicking about her cords," he said, helping Abby with her papers. "Already handled." Abby smiled. They're pressed and ready for tomorrow. Our valedictorian needs to look perfect. Tomorrow. Jamie's high school graduation. 5 years had transformed his daughter from a wounded 16-year-old into a confident young woman headed to Princeton with a full scholarship in psychology. Her experiences had shaped her career choice. She wanted to help other children navigate family trauma and betrayal. The last few years hadn't been easy for any of them. The aftermath of Rick and Carol's actions had rippled through their lives in unexpected ways. Carol had never recovered professionally after losing her teaching license. Last Pete heard, she was working at a small bookstore in Ocean City, living in a rented apartment paid for with alimony from her first divorce settlement. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She'd chosen Rick's promises of luxury over a stable marriage, only to end up with neither. The fraud investigation had revealed more than just property damage. Rick had been running a complex scheme, using inflated sales figures to secure loans and hiding structural defects that had put families at risk. One house had partially collapsed during a winter storm, though thankfully no one had been injured. The civil suits that followed had stripped him of everything. Their relationship hadn't survived prison. Carol had filed for divorce during Rick's second year inside, claiming in her filing that she'd been manipulated and misled about the extent of his criminal activities. The court documents painted her as another victim of Rick's schemes, but those who knew the truth remembered how she'd actively participated, using her position at the school to help process fraudulent paperwork. Pete's family had undergone their own transformation. Leah had sold her share in the family real estate business, unable to face the industry after her role in enabling Rick's behavior. She'd retrained as a social worker, her designer suits replaced by more practical clothing as she worked with families in crisis. Her own experience of moral failure had humbled her, making her particularly effective with clients struggling with guilt and redemption. His mother, Judith, had perhaps changed the most dramatically. The woman who'd once prioritized business success over everything else now volunteered at a youth center, teaching art classes to underprivileged kids. She'd apologized to Pete hundreds of times over the years, each time revealing a new layer of understanding about how thoroughly Rick had poisoned their family dynamics. She finally sold the beach house, Judith had told Pete during Sunday dinner last month. Some nice family bought it, tore down all that fancy remodeling Rick did. They found black mold behind those expensive panels, just like everything else in his life. All show and rot underneath. The doorbell rang, interrupting Pete's thoughts. Jamie bounded down the stairs, her dark hair, now streaked with subtle purple highlights, flying behind her. "That's probably Dr. Long," she called out. "She's helping me practice my speech one last time." Deborah Long had become a regular presence in their lives. After documenting Carol's misconduct, she'd gone on to get her PhD in educational psychology, using their case, with names changed, as part of her dissertation on workplace ethics and family dynamics. She'd been instrumental in Jamie's healing process, their weekly conversations evolving from therapy sessions into mentoring discussions about Jamie's own plans to enter the field. The Art Center called again, Abby mentioned as Jamie let Deborah in. "They want to know if you're teaching summer chemistry camp this year." Pete nodded. He'd started the program 3 years ago, using hands-on experiments to spark interest in science among elementary school students. It had begun as a way to keep busy during difficult summers, but had grown into something meaningful. Last year's group had included Rick's ex-wife Sylvia's daughter from her second marriage, a coincidence that might once have been awkward, but now felt like proof of how life moved in unexpected circles. Sylvia herself had rebuilt her life impressively. After helping expose Rick's fraud, she'd used her experience to start a consumer advocacy group for real estate buyers. Her organization now offered free property inspections to low-income families, ensuring they wouldn't fall victim to the kind of schemes her ex-husband had perpetrated. Barry Hahn still sent Christmas cards, usually accompanied by news articles about his latest cases. He'd expanded his private investigation firm, specializing in exposing white-collar crime and corporate fraud. The files he compiled on Rick's case were now used as teaching materials in his training seminars. "Pete," Abby's voice drew him back to the present. "Where'd you go just now?" "Just thinking about tomorrow," he replied, but they both knew he was really thinking about all the yesterdays that had led them here. Jamie and Deborah emerged from the study, graduation speech apparently perfected. Jamie's face glowed with the kind of confidence that only comes from overcoming real challenges. "Mom's going to be there tomorrow," Jamie said quietly, referring to Carol. "She called this morning, asked if she could come." Pete exchanged glances with Abby, who squeezed his hand supportively. They'd all done enough therapy to know that healing wasn't linear, that even happy occasions could trigger complex emotions. "How do you feel about that?" Pete asked his daughter. Jamie shrugged, but her voice was steady. "I'm not that wounded 16-year-old anymore, Dad. I can handle seeing her for an hour. Besides," she smiled at Abby, "I already know who's sitting in the front row with you." That evening, after Jamie and Deborah had finalized the speech, after Abby had triple-checked the graduation cords, Pete stood in his classroom one last time before summer break. The periodic table still hung where he'd placed it 20 years ago, its elements a testament to how the most stable structures could weather any storm. His phone buzzed, a text from Marcus Chun. "Asterisk just posted my latest research results. Couldn't have done it without you, Mr. W. Still using that benzene ring analogy you taught us. Asterisk." Another message followed, this one from his mother. Asterisk found old family photos while cleaning. "Realized something. In every picture where Rick was showing off some new success, you were in the background helping someone. Guess we know now which one really mattered." Asterisk. The sun was setting over the school parking lot, painting the sky in shades of possibility. Pete gathered his papers, turned off the lights, and locked room 237 for the summer. His Honda, newer now, but still modest, waited beside Abby's practical sedan. Life hadn't turned out the way anyone had expected. Rick and Carol had lost everything they'd thought important: money, status, reputation. But their choices had catalyzed changes no one could have predicted. Jamie's determination to help others. Leah's journey to redemption. His mother's transformation from status-obsessed matriarch to community volunteer. Even Pete himself had changed, learning that sometimes the worst betrayals could lead to the best renewals. Tomorrow, he would watch his daughter graduate. He would sit between his wife and his mother, surrounded by the family that had chosen truth over convenience, growth over stagnation. He would probably see Carol 5 years older and hopefully wiser, watching from somewhere in the back. Maybe he would even feel a flicker of gratitude, not for the betrayal, but for the strength they'd all found in its aftermath. The next day, as Jamie took the podium to deliver her valedictory speech, Pete noticed something remarkable. The summer sun streaming through the auditorium windows caught her purple hair highlights, creating a prismatic effect like light through his beloved benzene rings. In that moment, he understood what he'd been teaching his students all along: that the most interesting reactions weren't the ones you could predict, but the ones that transformed everything they touched, creating new and unexpected bonds in the process. Later, at the graduation party Abby had organized, surrounded by friends and family who'd weathered the storm with them, Pete watched his daughter explaining basic psychology concepts to his summer camp students. Nearby, Abby and Deborah discussed the intersection of mathematics and mental health. His mother and Leah sat with some of his former students, listening to their college stories with genuine interest. Life would never be perfect. Rick's release from prison would likely stir up old tensions. Carol's presence at future events would always carry a hint of past pain. But perfect wasn't the point anymore. The point was that they'd all learned to find strength in the breaking, beauty in the rebuilding, and wisdom in the scars that reminded them of how far they'd come. The chemistry teacher and Pete couldn't help but appreciate the irony. How a reaction that had threatened to destroy everything had instead created something stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more precious than what had existed before. Sometimes, he realized, the most important lessons weren't found in textbooks or laboratory experiments, but in the complex equations of human hearts learning to beat again after betrayal. As the summer evening wrapped around them like a gentle equation finding its natural solution, Pete looked at his expanded family. Not the one he'd expected, but the one he'd earned through trial and transformation, and felt the kind of peace that only comes from knowing that sometimes the best bonds are the ones you choose to forge after all the old ones have been tested and found wanting. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.